Hey everybody, today's video is called The Evils of Oppression, and today we continue our pass-through study here in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 4, where we're going to be looking at Solomon speaking on the evils of oppression. And oppression can be overused by people today to call everything oppressive. But Ecclesiastes 4:1 says, "Then I returned and considered all the oppression that is done under the sun. And look, the tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter. On the sides of their oppressors there is power, but they have no comforter." So we see that the preacher here is complaining that oppressors have all the power. And he had considered the problem of injustice as he was leaving off in the last chapter, and now he's moving on to focus on speaking against oppression. And the Old Testament is filled with examples of oppressed people. For example, in Proverbs 28:16, it speaks of oppression of people by a king. Government officials can oppress the people. The second point, Deuteronomy 24 verse 14, shows oppression of a servant by his master. You can be oppressed by your employer. Number 3, Proverbs 22:16 shows oppression of the poor by the affluent. Number 4, Ecclesiastes chapter 5 verse 8 in the next chapter shows oppression of the poor by the government officials. Number 5, Proverbs 28 verse 3 shows oppression of the poor by other poor people. Number 6, Jeremiah 7:6, Ezekiel 22 verse 7, Zechariah 7:10 shows oppression of the alien, the fatherless, and the widow. Number 7, Ezekiel 22 and Ezekiel 22:29 shows oppression by charging high interest. And doesn't that sound all familiar today? Lastly, Hosea chapter 12 verse 7 shows oppression by using false weights. And I know throughout the Old Testament studies, I've talked about how God hates the false use of scales to charge someone more than what something should be charged. So Solomon thought of the painful and tear-filled lives of the oppressed. We see that Solomon had a heart for righteousness, for justice. In verse 2 and 3 says, "Therefore I praise the dead who were already dead more than the living who are still alive. Yet better than both is he who has never existed, who has not seen the evil work that is done under the sun." So the oppressiveness of some lives rendered death more appealing. In viewing the plight of the oppressed, the preacher concludes that the dead and unborn are better off than those who are oppressed. And it kind of reminds you of Job, when Job said, it would have been better if I've never been born at all, or if I was dead. And earthly life can be so disheartening as to make non-existence preferable. And many of you can probably relate to that when you've gone through some hard times and hard situations, hard tragedies and trials. And the dead, Solomon is saying, they don't have to think about such painful things of this life. And the dead who are already dead in verse 2, it's an interesting phrase to me. And it implies that there are dead who are not dead yet, the living dead, so to speak. And when we look at the New Testament terminology, anyone that is outside of Christ, that hasn't placed their faith in Christ yet, are essentially the walking dead. And they walk this earth and have illogical life, but their spirit and their soul seems dead. And these verses are pretty sad. That's why the book Ecclesiastes is not always one of the popular ones. In verse 4 through 6, it says, "Again I saw that for all toil and every skillful work a man is envied by his neighbor. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. Better a handful of quietness than both hands full together with toil and grasping for the wind. So the lack of satisfaction with life leads some to conclude that everyone else has it better. And even the man who settles into idleness, living on what he takes from others, is self-tormented and never satisfied. The thief is never truly satisfied. And contentment is better than turmoil or envy. And we'll be talking about furthermore about contentment as we move across Ecclesiastes. In verse 7 and 8 it says, "Then I returned and I saw vanity under the sun. There is one alone without companion. He has neither son nor brother. Yet there is no end to all his labors, nor is his eye satisfied with riches. But he never asks, for whom do I toil and deprive myself of good? This is also vanity and a grave misfortune." So these verses in 7-8 focus on the futility of labor without community. And the preacher thought that this unexamined life of hard work and success without family and friends to share in it is all vanity. It's all meaningless and a grave misfortune. As human beings, we are not meant to do life alone. We are called to work together. And when Jesus sent the disciples out for, spreading the kingdom, he didn't just send them out one by one. It was supposed to be teamwork. Jesus sent them out by twos. So, we need to be able to work with others. And I hate to say that to introverts, because we like to be by ourselves and prefer to be away from civilization. But verse 9 through 12 says, "Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, two who can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken." So the futility of labor alone without satisfaction and without any here to experience its value is addressed here. And as I've been saying, life is better with companionship. And companionship benefits those who find themselves in need. And in verse 11 refers to companions on a journey, not a husband and wife. And companionship benefits those who find themselves oppressed. When you have others to be there to support you when you're going through oppression, it makes a difference. And in verse 12, community has benefits that even 3 is better than 2. So look at even, going in double pairs, the more the merrier. And teamwork leads to productivity, help in need, comfort in life, and safety and security. And many believe a three-chord fold speaks of God himself as the third. And we often hear that within marriage, that a good marriage will have 3 parts to it. It will have the husband and the wife and God right in the, in the middle. In verse 9 through 12 is a interesting set of verses as well to me, because, we see the value of friendships. And thinking of verse 11 especially, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? And if you are ever found to be in a very cold environment, like in the wintertime, and, there's no heat, and it's the matter of life and death survival, oftentimes what they recommend is that, if you're with someone, you would cuddle with them, and your body would heat them, and their body would heat you to keep you, safe through that dangerous temperatures. Verse 13 through 16, to finish the chapter, says, "Better a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who will be admonished no more. For he comes out of prison to be king, although he was born poor in his kingdom. I saw all the living who walk under the sun. They were with the second youth who stands in his place. There was no end of all the people over whom he had made king. Yet those who come afterward will not rejoice in him. Surely this is also vanity and grasping for the wind. So the cherished popularity of kings is uncertain and short-lived. And wisdom is better than wealth or folly. But even wisdom benefits have their limits. And under the sun is the spare of all humans. And in verse 15, second youth refers to the legitimate successor to the old king, as opposed to the poor youth who rises on his ability to reign. And so, to wrap up today's chapter, we look at the tragedy of oppression, comfortless oppression of man under the sun. Verse 2 and 3 shows us that because of oppression and sadness, man is better off dead. And Jesus said someone would have been better if he had not been born before. And I want to look at that in Matthew chapter 26, verse 24. Says here, the Son of Man indeed goes just as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born. So we see that Matthew 26 is speaking about Judas' betrayal, that it would have been better off if Judas was never born. In Matthew 18, verse 6 and 7 says, whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe to the world because of offenses, for offenses must come. But woe to that man by whom the offense comes. So Jesus also told us that those who oppress and misuse their power will endure punishment, in regards to children. And that's why these, knuckleheads out there that want to indoctrinate kids into drag queens and all that filthiness, they would be better off if a millstone was hung around their neck and they were thrown in the sea than what's coming against them from God's judgment. In chapter 4, verse 4 through 6, it shows us the success of 10 gains the envy of one's neighbor. 7 and 8 shows us what good is your success if you can't pass it on. Verse 9 through 12 shows us without a friend, accomplishments are vain. And we see that the chapter ends with the vanity of fame in its short life. And that's going to wrap up today's video. We'll see you next as we look next week at reverent worship is going to be the topic that the preacher hits on in chapter 5. So we'll see you for that next week, to be determined. God bless. Have a great rest of your weekend.